Okay, we're going to continue our discussion about classes, objects, and methods. In this lecture, we're going to try another class called fraction. So for this fraction class, we have two variables. So we're going to declare them: private integer numerator and denominator. And we don't need the main class here. And then we're going to create two constructors. So we learned about the constructor. We said that the constructor serves two purposes, two functions. The first one is to initialize values or variables. That means they assign values to the variables. And the second one, it allows us to create objects. So you can create as many constructors as you need. So we can create two. Let's say start with the default one. The default constructor is when you assign default values. Like for example, in our case, a default fraction has numerator and denominator equals to 1. So we're going to have public fraction, and then the default constructor comes with empty parentheses. And then you just assign default values. So you're going to put num equals 1, and then equals 1 as well. We're going to create another one. If you call the default constructor, you are assigning automatically 1 to both numerator and denominator. Now, if you decide to choose the other constructor, you have to be specific. You have to assign different values. So public fraction, then we're going to put numerator and denominator. So here we're going to put num equals n and denominator equals d. And then after that, we're going to create the accessor method. Get num num, and the same thing for denominator. Return then. Okay, so you can have also the modifier method if you want to. Now let's add more methods. Let's say we're going to create a method called add that allows to add two fractions. So when you add two fractions, what do you get in return? You get another fraction. So that means the return type should be a fraction object too. Public fraction, because that's the return type. And then we're going to put add. Then when you add, you need another fraction. You cannot just add fraction by using one fraction. You need another one, second one. So that's why we're going to have another one. Let's call it f. How do you add a fraction? So there are different ways. One of the ways you can add fraction is by cross multiplying and adding. So when you have two fractions, so you're going to multiply the numerator of the first one by the denominator of the second one, and then the denominator of the second one by the numerator of the first one by the numerator of the second one. So you're going to have something like this. Let's say the top x equals num multiply. So when you say num, we're talking about the current fraction. And then we're going to multiply it by f dot then plus f dot then, that means the denominator of the second one called f. And then we're going to multiply then times f dot num or num. So that's going to give us the top part. And then the bottom part is multiply the denominator by the denominator. So then times f dot then. Now when you return, we're going to return a new fraction. So new fraction that has a numerator x and denominator y. Okay, so that's going to give us the addition or the sum of two fractions. And then we can do the same thing for the other ones. Let's say for subtract. You want to subtract a fraction from a fraction, so you do the same thing. The only difference is you're going to replace minus, or you're going to replace plus by minus. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it in here. Okay, and then replace plus by minus. Now what about if I want to multiply two fractions? How do you multiply two fractions? Fraction as well, multiply another fraction. So you multiply the numerator of the first one, the current one, by the numerator of the second fraction, f, and the same thing for denominator. So you're gonna have x is f num times f dot num, and then y is then denominator of the first one or the current one by f dot then. And then you're going to return a new fraction, x, y, as numerator and denominator. Okay. And then we're going to continue with divide. How do you divide two fractions? So you just multiply by the reciprocal. So here we're going to copy this and then make some changes. When you divide, you just multiply by the reciprocal, which is 10 here, and this is num. Okay, now let's try it and see if this is working. Let me build it. Okay, no error. And then I need to create a tester. So I'm going to create a second class called tester, where the main method will be located. Let me call it fraction tester. So let me create fraction object. So let's say fraction f1. New fraction. So if I put empty parentheses, that means I'm calling the default constructor. So which means that the numerator and denominator have a value of 1. So let me choose something else. Let's say for fifth. Okay, so that's my current fraction. So if I want to add, I need another fraction. So I'm going to put fraction f2. Equals new fraction. And I'm going to put, let's say, 3 and 7, just an example. Okay, let's say I want to add. So I'm going to put here f1, the current one, and then you put add, and then look at the second fraction, which is f2. f2. Now, if I try to run the program, what I'm going to get? I'm going to get that weird number that we get every time we don't have a toString. So I'm going to go back and add the toString, because the toString allows me to print the objects properly. So I'm going to put public string toString. Then how do you expect the fraction to be displayed? So usually we put the num, and then we put that backslash, forward slash, and then denominator. So that's how the fraction should look like. So let's build it. Now if I run the program now, it's going to give me the addition. So that's 43 over 35. Okay, so if I change, and then for example I put 1/2 plus 3/4, for example. So it's going to give me 10 over 8. So what's the problem with this one? It works fine. The only problem is it does not simplify it. So we need to add a method that reduces the fraction. That means to simplify it as far as possible. So we're going to add another method called, let's make it void reduce or simplify. How do you simplify? The first thing, we need to find the greatest common denominator. So let's say GCD is by default is 1, because all the numbers, they have 1 as a common denominator, but we're looking for the greatest one. So what we're going to do, we're going to start from the smallest of the two. The smallest of the two. So let's have a variable called small that's going to find the minimum of the two, because we need to keep dividing by both numbers from 1 till the smallest of the two numbers. So the highest one should be the greatest common denominator. So here we have none and then whatever the smallest one is. And then we're going to start from that number, small, until we get to 1 minus, and then if we're looking for a number that is evenly divisible by both numbers, that's what the greatest common denominator means. That means it is divided by both numbers. So we're going to put here if. So I'm going to put here if then put the remainder I equals 0 and denominator mod I equals 0. This means it's divided evenly by both numbers. So here we're going to put GCD should be equal to I. And then we're going to break, because once we find the number, we need to stop. So we're going to put here a break. And then at the end, so right here, we're going to simplify. So we're going to put here, so num should be equal to num divided by GCD. And then is then divided by GCD. So that's one way of making the reduce method. So let's try it here. And then let's try to do it to call the method in the constructor. So this way, when you create fraction objects the first time, it will be reduced automatically. So here we're going to put reduce. Now, if we go to the tester now, so here we have 10 over 8. So if we call the method, so we're going to have 5 over 4. So it was simplified. So it looks like it is working. You can add more methods if you want to, like for example, change a fraction to a decimal. Sometimes you want to change it to a decimal number. So we can have a decimal, that means double. So we're going to put 2 decimal. Decimal, we're going to put return. You need to change one of them to double. So we're going to cast it to double. And divide by 10. Without double, you're going to have integer over integer is integer, so the decimal is ignored. But by casting to double first before dividing, you are changing it to a double number. Okay, so this is basically the fraction class. It teaches you a lot of things about classes, objects, and methods. So I hope you find this useful. So thank you for watching and see you in the next lecture.